Our second day in this Holy Week, where we are preparing ourselves to celebrate Easter, that is, the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And as we said in the previous episode, we are reading throughout these 6 days passages that are before the moment of his resurrection. Of course, that we're not reading every passage, we're just bringing some specific moments that can help us perceive the greatness of his revelation in his resurrection. And today we are going to be reading the parable of the fig tree and his exhortation to vigilance, so that we can perceive what is it that Christ is calling us to be watchful for. And in his Sermon on the Mountain, he brings this parable and this exhortation for a reason. Why is that? Well, as we remember, we talked about his triumphant entrance in Jerusalem, and after that he went on the Sermon on the Mountain, and he went to the Mount of Olives and bring his sermon, which is the main sermon bringing all that prophecies of his triumphant return, because as we also brought, when he is entering Jerusalem, he's not only fulfilling a prophecy from the Old Testament, but he's also opening the spiritual path for the prophecy of his triumphant return. And here on his sermon, or in his sermon, he is talking about that. He's bringing everything that will happen and that we need to be watchful. Now, in this passage, he will be talking about some signs that are very specific to us. So let us see that by reading the passage in his gospel according to Luke chapter 21, verses 29 to 36. It is the passage, the parable of the fig tree and exhortation to vigilance. Well, I will be reading here from my Bible, but I will share with you the passage so that you can follow my reading, and we will see what is it that Christ is bringing to us. Jesus told them this parable. Look at the fig tree and all the trees. When they sprout leaves, you can see for yourselves and know that summer is near. Even so, when you see these things happening, you know that the kingdom of God is near. Truly, I tell you, this generation will certainly not pass away until all these things have happened. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will never pass away. Be careful, or your hearts will be weighed down with carousing, drunkenness, and anxieties of life. And that day will close on you suddenly, like a trap, for it will come on all those who live on the face of the whole earth. Be always on the watch and pray that you may be able to escape all that is about to happen, and that you may be able to stand before the Son of Man. There is something that Jesus emphasizes here in this passage that we sometimes underestimate. We don't care about it because it manifests itself in a very simple and natural way, which is the ability that God has given to us to observe patterns. This capacity that we all have is underestimated by us. Jesus himself, he speaks in this passage, as we see right in the first verses, that if we are able to observe that there are divine laws that govern nature, which sometimes we call it as natural laws as well, and that guide us regarding planting and harvesting and everything else in our lives, we certainly are also able to perceive the functioning of these divine laws in the spiritual realm regarding Christ's triumphant return. Another thing that is very interesting here is the prophetic aspect of this passage and the connections that we can make with it. Christ, he is speaking of the influence of time in the material reality and how it is different from the influence of time in the spiritual realm or the spiritual reality. That is the realm of prophecies. Because he is telling us, as we see here, right in the verses 32 to 33, that there are differences between the time that we have here in this world as incarnated beings and the time that exists in the spiritual realm, the prophetic realm. Now, one thing that we have to pay attention to is the matter of generations, because Brother Paiva, he explains to us that here, since Christ is talking about it in prophetic terms, and he is bringing to our conscience the existence of a spiritual realm that we have to pay attention to, so that it will shows us and manifest to us the signs that he is bringing in the Sermon on the Mountain. He is not talking about a material generation, because that material generation already died. If you think about it, they're not here anymore, materially speaking, but they are spiritually speaking. Now, that should be understood under the comprehension of the law of reincarnation. Because if we're talking about the same spirits that were there with Christ at that moment, then they should be present here as well to face what Christ was telling them that would happen. And through the law of reincarnation, we understand that the spirits, they go back to the spiritual world and then they come back to this material world in a journey of spiritual progression to take out the stains of their souls, to correct themselves from their corrupted ways, to finally grow up spiritually, saying, if you think about it, since there is difference between the time in the material world and time in the spiritual world, as Christ was telling us. Because he also says that heaven and earth will pass away, but his words will never pass away. So what we can take from it is that our experience shows us that the body, it grows old, it fades with time, that everything that is material will fade with time, but not what is spiritual, not what is in this realm, which are also the realm of the prophecies of God. And that is so much true that we see Christ telling us in his book of Revelation, chapter 1, verses 8 and 17 to 19, about it, about his presence, his spiritual presence since the beginning of times and the end of times. Of course, not the destruction of the world, but the end of a cycle to the beginning of another one, with him already here triumphantly in this world and establishing the kingdom of God in this world. So Christ is calling our attention for us to look at the spiritual above the material, for us to turn our lives to the reality of the spiritual world, of our true origin as spirits, and not be bound in the material that will fade with time. And that is for us to work so that we can acquire treasures in heaven instead of trying to acquire treasures in this world that moth and thieves can take it from us. Now, how we can connect that with ourselves. That is how we can take this lesson, this comprehension that he's bringing to us, this spiritual conscience, and put in practice in our lives. The connection is in the two meanings. Just as Jesus is telling us that we are able to observe the signs of climate change, or even when a fruit is ripe to be taken because of the experiences that were passed down through generations, we can also perceive through his teachings the spiritual signs that will reveal the changes happening in this world for his triumphant return. And he calls our attention to also perceive the spiritual signs that are alienating ourselves from this divine connection with him to be ready for the moment, because he tells us that no one will be spared, that everyone will face the great tribulation, everyone will face the struggles, the anguish, the suffering that is coming to this world before his triumphant return. And because of that, he is also telling us the following: look, you need to be careful with at least these three things, so that you are not alienated from what is happening and you can prepare yourselves. In summary, these three things are sex, greed, and anxiety. Sex, because when you have this intimate exchange of energies with another person, you are being open to receive their energy and mix that with yourself, with your energy, because we are in essence a spirit, and in essence as well conscience energy. So when you are having sex, you are having this exchange, which it can alter your individuality. It can alter your mind and your perception of the world, because you'll be opening a direct path of influence from that other spirit. That is what happens when you have sex. You make a spiritual connection with that other being, with that other person, and you maintain that exchange. It can be stronger or weaker, and that can alienate you from yourself. And if it's not bound in love, if it's only something to alleviate your psyche, that is your mental stress, to alleviate yourself in a psychological way, believing that it's only material bodies that are having a connection, in reality, it's not. It's the spirit that is connecting itself. And that can bring terrible consequences to your own formation, to your own individuality. Just for us to understand that when you have a couple and they naturally will have this exchange, spiritually speaking, throughout the years that they are together, you start to see that they are kind of the same person. And it is very connected with Genesis, when we see that man and woman, or the couple, when they are together, they become one flesh. In spiritual terms, they become one person, because you start to see that they will develop the same tastes, they will develop the same habits, they will be helping each other or even hindering each other depending on how the relationship is. If there is love, they will help each other and maintain their individuality, and they will walk together, each one in their own way, but also in unison, in harmony, helping each other, noticing the subtle hints that each one give and that you already perceive. You have a unique connection with that person. When there is no love, one of the couple will subdue himself, herself to the other partner, and will start to lose their own individuality and start to become more and more like the other person. And when you see it, definitely they look the same. Not materially speaking, even though that can happen in the future, and it's a topic for another video, but spiritually speaking, in terms of habits, of mentality, of actions, they will act just like they are one. And that is the problem when you use this divine instrument of creation, that is sex, which we all know when you have it, later on you will have a baby, we will have a child, because it opens the path for the manifestation of life in this world. So when you use it in a corrupted way, that is in this orgy way that Christ is calling your attention to, you lose yourself. You alienate you from yourself. That's the problem with it. Greed, it is the manifestation of vice. It is when you are so obsessed with something that is material to fulfill you spiritually, even though it cannot, you create this vice to always be acquiring that thing, be it an object, being people, or someone in your life. You create that greediness, and it becomes a vice where you can only feel fulfilled if you have that, if you feed yourself spiritually speaking, because materially it won't satiate you. And the last one, which is anxiety, is that limbo realm that you put yourself in time, where you are anxious about the future but comparing with the past and forgetting the present. Now, vigilance, it is a tool for sobriety, which Christ asks us to have so we can prevent the excessive natural manifestation of the material instincts that the body brings, because the body will want to procreate, the body will want to feed itself, and the body will work to protect itself from the future, understanding the patterns of the laws of nature. So when we let that manifest in an excessive way, and we corrupt this natural instincts for survival, we ended up having these three aspects that can alienate us from our reality, from ourselves, and put us in a state where we won't perceive the spiritual signs, we won't perceive the things that are happening in our lives, and we will be in suffering, we will be in pain, we will be in anguish. That's what Christ is calling us to pay attention to, so we can avoid that. When we are vigilant, we are looking for sobriety, we are looking to have control of it and have a spiritual conscience of everything that is happening in our lives, in a way that we can be in the peace of God and be ready to present ourselves sober to Christ and not lost to our own vices, lost to ourselves, and lost to God, and then ended up having to go into a path of pain and suffering so we can wake up, so we can perceive our spiritual uniqueness, so we can perceive that we are, above all, eternal spirits created in the image and likeness of God. And hopefully, that's what we will achieve through this study that we are doing. That is why I invite you to subscribe to this channel and continue with us in these studies that we are doing throughout the 6 days until Easter, that is the day where we celebrate the resurrection of Christ, so we can wake up and have this spiritual conscience. Don't forget to subscribe, leave your comments down below. Also participate in our community to be daily having this moment with Jesus, the light of the world, so that we can perceive his divine revelation that he incarnates and brings to us in his gospel and book of Revelation. May the peace of God be upon you today and always, and I see you the next time.